Hi everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about what research I've done on Christianity. Um, Understanding the historical context of Christianity is crucial for any examination of its doctrines, key figures, or points of contention. This context provides a foundation for exploring how different interpretations and traditions have emerged over time. One key figure in early Christianity is Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus. Paul's influence on the development and spread of Christianity was profound and far-reaching. Originally a zealous persecutor of early Christians, Paul underwent a dramatic conversion experience on the road to Damascus. The book of Acts describes this moment. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Following this transformative experience, Paul became one of the most ardent proponents of the new faith, Christianity. He embarked on several missionary journeys throughout the Mediterranean, establishing Christian communities and writing letters that would later become a significant part of the New Testament. In his own words, "I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing." Paul's teachings and interpretations of Jesus' message had a profound impact on Christian theology. He emphasized salvation through faith in Christ rather than adherence to Mosaic law. This is clearly expressed in his letter to the Galatians. "We who are Jews by birth and not sinful Gentiles know that person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ." So I want to dive deeper into Paul as a person, really, rather than an author. So I want to find out, was Paul really a divinely appointed apostle, or was he just someone who hijacked a nascent faith to sort of get his views across? So our investigation will kind of go into the origins of where he grew up, Tarsus, and challenge the authenticity of the letters he wrote. We'll go talk about the disagreements between Paul and the Jerusalem apostles who walked with the living Jesus, and sort of take a look at his apostolic claims to authority. And then I think by the end we'll be able to decide as objective observers, unburdened by centuries of tradition, whether we can justifiably accept Paul's self-proclaimed authority. Really quickly, I actually want to talk about Tarsus in the first century. Tarsus was a city of remarkable historical and cultural significance. It was founded around 1400 BCE when the Hittites settled the area, and over time it evolved under various empires, including the Assyrians, Persians, and eventually the Romans. By 67 BCE, during the time of Pompey, Tarsus was designated as the capital of the Roman province of Cilicia. This period marked a significant turning point for the city, as Jews began to receive Roman citizenship, which enhanced their social and economic standing within the Roman Empire. Tarsus flourished as an intellectual and cultural hub, attracting scholars, philosophers, and rhetoricians from across the Mediterranean. The Roman orator Cicero, who served as governor of Cilicia in 51 to 50 BCE, praised Tarsus in his letters, describing it as a distinguished and free town. This sentiment reflects the growing prominence of the city in the Roman world. By 42 BCE, Antony declared Tarsus a free city, and this status was reinforced under Augustus, who exempted Tarsus from imperial taxation as a favor to Athenodorus, his teacher and friend, a Tarsian philosopher. As a result, Tarsus enjoyed significant privileges and continued to grow in stature. By the 1st century AD, Tarsus had become renowned for its educational and philosophical institutions, surpassing even Athens and Alexandria in some respects. Strabo, a Greek geographer and historian, wrote extensively about Tarsus in his work called Geography. He noted that the people of Tarsus devoted themselves eagerly to philosophy and education, surpassing other famous centers of learning such as as I mentioned before, Athens and Alexandria. This view of Tarsus as an intellectual powerhouse is further supported by the Roman philosopher Philostratus, who, in his work Lives of the Sophists, described Tarsus as a city devoted to letters, where lectures were attended by youths from all parts. Modern scholars have also emphasized the importance of Tarsus in the ancient world. Sir William Mitchell Ramsay, an archaeologist and New Testament scholar, stated that Tarsus was the capital of the Cilician plain and a center of wide and varied commercial life. Jerome Murphy O'Connor, in his work Paul, A Critical Life, underscored the city's significance, highlighting that Tarsus was a free city with a university that enjoyed a reputation second only to Alexandria and Athens. So some thought it was superior, some would say maybe not as good as Alexandria and Athens. These perspectives from both ancient and modern scholars reinforce the view of Tarsus as a great city filled with cultural and intellectual significance during the first century. So this is the city from which Paul grew up. So he says in Acts chapter 21, verse 39, that he was from Tarsus. It was, according to him, no obscure city. So even the people he was surrounded with knew about just how famous Tarsus was. Growing up in Tarsus, Paul would have been exposed to the cultural and intellectual movements of the Hellenistic world. Hellenism refers to the spread of Greek culture and ideas throughout the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world following the conquests of Alexander the Great. This cultural diffusion included not only art and literature, but also philosophical and religious ideas. Tarsus was a center of Stoic philosophy and hosted prominent philosophers such as Athenodorus, Zeno, Antipater, and Nestor in the 1st century AD. The Stoic school, founded by Zeno of Citium, emphasized rationality, self-control, and virtue as the highest goods. Paul's intellectual environment would have been rich with discussions on ethics, metaphysics, and logic, providing him with a broad and deep education in these areas. Paul's writings and speeches exhibit a strong grasp of Hellenistic rhetoric and philosophy. His ability to engage in apologetic arguments and his use of rhetorical techniques in his epistles suggests that he was well versed in the intellectual traditions of his time. It is plausible to view Paul as a novice Hellenistic philosopher who sought to make a name for himself by engaging with and adapting the cultural and intellectual currents of Tarsus. His later transformation into a leading figure in early Christianity can be seen as an extension of his initial ambitions, repurposed to spread the message of Christ. Hellenistic influence permeated Tarsus in multiple dimensions, from its educational institutions to its religious life. The presence of schools of rhetoric and philosophy indicates a society deeply engaged with Greek intellectual traditions. Hellenism in Tarsus would have entailed a blend of Greek and local cultures, resulting in a unique syncretism that influenced many aspects of daily life. Wayne A. Meeks, in his influential study The First Urban Christians, notes that Tarsus was thoroughly Hellenized, with Greek being the language of culture and the educational system being Greek, albeit with some local variations. This highlights how deeply ingrained Greek culture had become in Tarsian life. From a religion standpoint, Hellenism in Tarsus meant the coexistence and interaction of various belief systems. Greek polytheism, with its pantheon of gods and goddesses, played a significant role. Temples dedicated to Greek deities, such as Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, would have been common, and religious festivals and rituals would have been integral to public life. The ancient geographer Strabo provides evidence of this religious diversity in Tarsus, noting a monument to Sardanapalus with an inscription in Assyrian characters. This account demonstrates the coexistence of Greek and Eastern religious traditions in Tarsus. Modern scholar Leif Evag comments on the religious landscape of Tarsus, highlighting the city's variety of religious cults, including those of Sandan, often identified as Heracles, Baal, and the Emperor, along with a significant Jewish population. Jerome Murphy O'Connor further elaborates on the religious atmosphere of Tarsus, describing the dominance of the cult of Sandan Heracles and the unique rites associated with it. Helmut Keister summarizes the Hellenistic character of Tarsus, noting that the city had long been thoroughly Hellenized, with citizens speaking Greek, being educated in Greek schools, and participating in Greek cultural institutions. At the same time, Tarsus preserved elements of its ancient Near Eastern heritage, creating a unique blend of cultures. Sir William Mitchell Ramsay emphasized this cultural fusion, noting how Tarsus's institutions molded Paul's family in boyhood, transforming it from an Oriental town to a Hellenized city influenced by Greek spirit and education. Paul's background as a Roman citizen born in Tarsus and educated as a Pharisee placed him at a unique cultural crossroads, exposing him to a wide array of religious and philosophical ideas prevalent in the first century Roman Empire. The cultural milieu of Paul's time was rich with mythological narratives that shared striking similarities, particularly in themes of divine parentage, death, and resurrection. Scholars have long recognized Paul's deep engagement with Hellenistic culture. Charles Engberg Peterson argues that Paul was thoroughly imbued with Hellenistic culture, with his thought world shaped by Greek philosophical ideas and his rhetoric influenced by Greek techniques. This suggests that Paul would have been well versed in the stories of Greek gods and heroes like Dionysus, Hercules, and Asclepius, all of whom had narratives involving divine parentage, death, and some form of resurrection or apotheosis. Wayne Meeks further supports this view, noting that Paul's letters reveal a man thoroughly at home in the urban environment of the Roman Empire, familiar with the institutions of the Hellenistic city and being able to use its cultural resources. This familiarity would naturally extend to the religious stories and cults that were an integral part of Hellenistic urban life, including those of Osiris and Adonis, which, like the Greek myths, featured themes of cyclical death and rebirth. Jerome Murphy O'Connor asserts that Paul could move effortlessly between Jewish and Gentile environments, quoting Greek poets and using Greek rhetorical devices. This ability to navigate diverse cultural contexts suggests that Paul was aware of the parallels between various mythological figures, such as the virgin birth attributed to Adonis, the healing power of Asclepius, or the premise of eternal life offered by cults like that of Dionysus. The depth of Paul's engagement with Hellenistic thought is further emphasized by Martin Hengel, who argues that Paul's background in Tarsus, a center of Hellenistic learning, and his later interactions in the Greco-Roman world would have made him intimately familiar with the myths and religious stories of his time. N.T. Wright suggests that Paul's mind was not only steeped in Second Temple Judaism, but also capable of readily engaging with and in reinterpreting Hellenistic concepts. This implies that Paul would have been well acquainted with the stories of gods and demigods, able to understand their significance in the Hellenistic culture, and potentially draw parallels or contrasts with his own theological ideas. David Ani provides perhaps the most direct support for Paul's familiarity with these mythological narratives, arguing that Paul's use of Hellenistic rhetorical techniques and engagement with Greco-Roman philosophical concepts indicate not just a superficial knowledge, but a deep understanding of the cultural and religious milieu of his time. Evidence from Paul's own writings supports these scholarly assessments. His quotation of Greek poets in Acts chapter 7 verse 28 and his discussion of idols and many gods in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verses 4 to 6 demonstrate his awareness of and engagement with the religious diversity of his time. The recurring themes in the myths of Dionysus, Osiris, Adonis, Hercules, and Asclepius, divine parentage, death, resurrection, and the promise of eternal life are strikingly echoed in Paul's theology. This thematic overlap, combined with Paul's deep immersion in Hellenistic culture, suggests that he would have been acutely aware of these stories and their cultural resonance. His ability to articulate the Christian message in a way that resonated with both Jewish and Gentile audiences indicates a sophisticated understanding of the religious narratives that shaped the world in which he lived and preached. So, Tarsus's geographical location on the southern coast of Asia Minor, 79 feet above sea level and 10 miles from the Mediterranean Sea, significantly contributed to its prosperity and strategic importance. Built around the Cydnus River, which provided a vital waterway for trade and transportation, Tarsus flourished. The fertile plains of eastern Cilicia supported agriculture, while the mountains western region offered natural defenses and resources, creating a robust and sustainable economy. The city's prosperity enabled it to support a vibrant cultural and intellectual life. Strabo emphasized Tarsus's dedication to education and philosophy. Um, Tarsus was a place where students learned the art of persuasive speaking, an essential skill that Paul later used effectively in his missionary work. This educational environment fostered a community deeply engaged in intellectual pursuits, one which Paul very evidently was steeped in. In the first century, Tarsus was a city of great cultural and intellectual vitality. As discussed before, it was deeply influenced by Hellenistic ideas and Greek polytheism. Paul would have been, again, deeply immersed in this stimulating environment, which would have shaped his intellectual development and equipped him with the tools to engage with diverse audiences. His later role as a Christian apostle can be seen as an extension of his early ambitions as a novice Hellenistic philosopher. So, building upon this perspective, we can explore the idea that Paul's transformation from a zealous Pharisee to a Christian apostle was not solely a result of divine intervention, but it could have been very well a calculated move by an ambitious philosopher seeking to carve out his niche in the intellectual landscape of the time. The Hellenistic world was rife with competing philosophical schools and mystery cults, each vying for adherence and influence. Paul, having been exposed to this vibrant marketplace of ideas in Tarsus, may have recognized an opportunity to synthesize elements of Jewish theology, Greco-Roman philosophy, and the emerging stories about Jesus into a new and compelling worldview. The view that Paul was a novice philosopher seeking fame is something that I learned about from Dr. Ali Attai, a scholar of biblical hermeneutics with field specialties in sacred languages, comparative theology, and comparative literature. He mentioned it briefly during a podcast with Paul Williams on the YouTube channel Blogging Theology, published on July 10th, 2024. Unfortunately, I won't go into everything that he discussed in that video. Some things will be echoed here, but I'll link it in the description for anyone who wants to watch that. In fact, I highly recommend it, that you go and view that video. So, one potential perspective of the hypothesis posits that Paul's Damascus Road experience, rather than being a supernatural event, was a moment of philosophical epiphany, a realization that he could reinterpret the story of Jesus through the lens of Hellenistic thought. Although this is a secular reinterpretation, it is worth considering. In reality, if Paul did see something, it was more than likely an evil influence seeking to destroy the ministry of James and divert Christians away from pure monotheism. Paul's subsequent travels and letters can be seen as a concerted effort to establish himself as a leading thinker and propagate his ideas throughout the Mediterranean world. The apparent contradictions in his writings and his frequent clashes with other early Christian leaders could be interpreted as evidence of his ongoing process of refining and adapting his philosophy to different audiences and challenges. This interpretation of Paul is not as far-fetched as it might initially seem when considering the historical context of his upbringing and education. His formal education as a Pharisee under Gamaliel in Jerusalem would have further honed his skills in textual interpretation and argumentation. This background provided Paul with the intellectual tools and cultural fluency to engage with both Jewish and Gentile audiences effectively. Moreover, Paul's initial role as a persecutor of Christians might be seen as part of his philosophical journey. As a zealous adherent to the Pharisaic Judaism, he may have initially viewed the Christian movement as a threat to his worldview. However, this opposition could have inadvertently exposed him to the variety of early sects of Christianity. Paul saw that there were many different ideas about what it meant to accept Jesus as the Messiah. as different early Christian groups had different thoughts on the subject. The nascent religion was one where he could easily infiltrate and proliferate his philosophy and make a name for himself. It's also clear from his writings that he wasn't exactly a fan of the Jewish laws he was taught growing up. So, what better way to justify his reverence toward them? This early disunity in Christianity is well documented by scholars. Bart Ehrman, in his book Lost Christianities, states that in the beginning there was not just one Christianity, but many Christianities. For the first 300 years of Christian history, there were numerous groups of people who understood themselves to be Christian, but who held significantly different understandings of the religion. James D.G. Dunn further supports this view in Unity and Diversity in the New Testament, stating that there was no single normative form of Christianity in the first century. Larry W. Hurtado also agrees with this, and he says that the diversity of early Christianity has been increasingly recognized both geographically and chronologically. Paul's willingness to face persecution and ultimately martyrdom for his beliefs doesn't necessarily need to be seen as proof for their divine origin. I honestly never understood the argument that someone dying for something necessarily makes it true, or the idea that who quote unquote would die for a lie. It need not be the case that Paul died for a lie. He could very well have believed that what he was saying was the truth, but that does not necessitate that what he believes actually was the truth. I could believe that it's raining outside right now, genuinely in my heart of hearts. Um, Maybe you call it religious psychosis or just ambition, to be willing to die for your ideas. So basically, what I'm saying is you could view his martyrdom as the ultimate commitment of a philosopher to his ideas. In the Greco-Roman world, philosophers often faced opposition and even death for their teachings. One only need think of Socrates. For a thinker wholly devoted to the impact and longevity of his ideas, physical suffering or even death might be considered a small price to pay for the chance at intellectual immortality. This interpretation of Paul sees him not as a cynical manipulator, but as a deeply committed ideologue who believed that widespread adoption of his philosophical system would grant him everlasting prominence and eminence among Tarsian philosophers.